welcome to the Hurling Show, brought to you by eFrontiers, the recruitment specialist. Go to e-frontiers.com, or if you want to get your CV in, if you're looking for work, send it into ourgame at e-frontiers.com. Michael Verney, that's some head of hair and you have at this stage.
Yeah, in fairness, I'm sticking to all lockdown protocols and I'm not letting anyone near it unless they're a professional.
Yeah, have you thought about becoming a scarecrow in your spare time?
No, usually when we do a bit of hair silage ratting, I usually just stand around the fields at night time and just scare them away.
Do you know, actually, I queued up for an hour outside a hairdresser's the day before the hairdressers were shut, and the TD, Matty McGrath, was ended up queuing up outside it as well, and this is in Dublin. So I said, you might as well turn on your heels there and wait for an hour. He wasn't going to stay looking at it. But
I tell you what, as well, actually, Aaron Wheelit and Brian's son, he was going for he does a bit of barbering, and he was going for a kind of a trial over in Athlone there to see. They wanted to see whether to take him on or not. So in his wisdom, he brought me as the model that he was going to cut my hair. I'd say it took him a good hour and 15 minutes.
And I'd say he'd want the hedge clippers to go with it.
He got the job. In fairness, he got the job after.
Well, fair play. It took. Well, look, we've an unreal show coming as usual. The hurling is coming thick and fast lately. There's the quarterfinals between Galway and Tipperary, Waterford and Clare. The Joe McDonagh Cup is in round 4. Meader against Westmeath, Kerrier against Carlow. And then the Christy Ring Cup final and Nicky Racker Cup finals are really good stuff. You're going to both of them, down against Kildare and Donegal against Mayo. So just a quick rehash on a couple of the results last week for anyone who's been living under a rock. Limerick beat Waterford 25 points to 21 in the Munster final. Kilkenny saw off Galway after coming from behind a couple of times, 220 to 24 points. Tipperary nudged out Cork and Clare beat Wexford, and we'll go through the results in the lower tiers as well when we come to that competition. We'll start off with Waterford against Clare. I mean, it's all about Tony Kelly really, and can he keep this glorious season going?
Yeah, it kind of is, isn't it? It's been like he's on a different stratosphere at the moment. 145 so far, and he's been unstoppable in every game that he's played. There's always the worry, I'm sure, from the Clare point of view, and they'll obviously never say that they're a one-man team. A lot of people are saying it's Tony Kelly and 14 others, but if he doesn't play well, you'd wonder where the scores are going to come from. And I think that's an interesting thing with Wexford or with Waterford and Clare this weekend. You probably have Stephen Bennett on one side, and you probably have Tony Kelly on the other side, and you're wondering, whoever has the broader range of scores outside of those lads will probably be the winners. They're going to chip in probably with their usual few scores from frees and from play. But who are the other guys that are going to chip in? I think that's probably something we need to delve into a bit more. Who has potentially a broader range of scores? And I think that's really going to be where it's won and lost, because it's very, very hard. There's obviously pros and cons for both, but it's very, very hard to pick a winner in that game.
Yeah, you'd think on the face of it, Waterford probably have a couple more scores because Austin Gleeson, because of his reputation, and you know, is he going to back that up with a couple of more big performances? We know what's in him, it's just to get it out of him. He scored 3 points the last day, but it kind of said it all that Liam Cahill still felt it was worth taking him off towards the end of the game. Desi Hutchinson, again from a potential point of view, if he gets fed enough, especially on the front foot in space, he's going to be hard to stop. Also, as I've said to you many times, even going back to Ballygunner last year, if he'd actually turn and go for a goal on the inside rather than always going on the outside and taking the point, a bit like a quarterback in the NFL, he goes for the check down rather than going for the one down the field. I think that there should be more scores in that Waterford team. But just to come back to the Tony Kelly thing, really interesting who will pick him up. The job that Callum Lyons did on Grow at Hegarty, now they had a great battle and Hegarty still contributed massively to Limerick winning that game, but I did think Callum Lyons was really good, and the fact that he would be able to travel up and down the field all day with Tony Kelly, it's not that he's just that he's unbelievably fast and skillful, it's the fact that he can stay going all day too. So Watford might even toy with the idea of swapping different guys on him over the course of the game, give a guy a bit of a break. But I think Callum Lyons might be the guy. I don't think Lyons would care whether he's marking him in fullback, cornerback, wherever it might be.
Yeah, I don't know if he'd follow him. If he went in full forward, I'd say they'd be happy enough to leave Conor Prunty on him, I'd say, because I don't think they'll veer away from moving the tree away from the edge of the square. But I think he could play anywhere else. Probably he can play fullback. That's not to say he can't play fullback, but I'd say he'd follow him anywhere else across the back six, maybe apart from fullback. As you said, he's very, very dynamic and interesting. Like we've talked about before, if Kelly was out wing forward, he has the potential to put him on the back foot, do like what Philly McMahon did to the Gooch. and he obviously got 1-2 against Cork. Maybe wasn't able to get it forward as much as he'd like in the Munster final, but he has that potential to put him on the back foot. There is a bit of a conundrum though from a Waterford point of view, looking like Shane Fives is going to be out with a quad injury. He limped off maybe about 10 or 15 minutes to go, and then you're like, are they making a straight swap with somebody coming in for Fives at cornerback?
Maybe
and
Ian
potentially
Kenny.
yeah, possibly Conor Gleeson is thereabouts as well. Would they bring Conor Gleeson in and put him straight on Kelly? I doubt it. I doubt it, just because he doesn't have enough game time. So there could be a little reshuffle there. They could bring someone in at cornerback. They could bring someone in at wing back, and maybe Callum Lyne to drop back. It'd be interesting to see, but there's a small little question mark over that defence there, just whether the back six will be as solid now with one of the mainstays gone. And in fairness, Shane Fives is under a small bit of pressure in the first half. Really snuffed out Peter Casey in that first 15 or 20 minutes. It's amazing, and it's a lesson to any young fella on how a game can change as well. You could be under some pressure, you turn the screw, you're after getting 3 points scored off you turn the screw, all of a sudden you're totally on top. 20 minutes later your man is taken off, and that's how a game can change. And it's probably just a lesson to every young lad, just to, if you stay at it, like the wheel can turn. But he's going to be a big loss at the weekend, and just creates a few more conundrums. Kevin Moran as well, I just kind of was looking back at the game and kind of thinking, I didn't really realise it at the time, but while he didn't get on a huge amount of ball, like neither did Tom Morrissey. Tom Morrissey barely touched the ball, and we're talking with the much vaunted half forward line, and I'm sure they'll be brilliant again before the season is out. But between Lyons and in particular Kevin Moran, they were able to nullify those two big rangy half forwards to set up a lot of Limerick attacks. So it'll be interesting to see. Callum Lyons, to me, probably would be the best fit for Kelly though.
And now that you mention Kevin Moran, I was thinking, would he match up quite well with Cathal Malone? Cathal Malone has been probably one of Clare's most consistent players this season. He was named at number 14 the first day against Limerick, but I think it's pretty obvious to anyone who's watched any games for Clare over the years that he was going to operate as the third man out around the field, and he picked up Cian Lynch and did pretty well as anyone can do against Cian Lynch when you're looking to shut him down and when your team is massively on the back foot, because those two together, it's very hard to keep into him. Thought he was good against Laois, and he was also very good the last day against Wexford. So Kevin Moran against Lynch, against Kevin Moran against Cathal Malone, I think is a matchup. And just good
matchup for Waterford, Shane, there as well. That's a good matchup for Waterford, I think.
Well, Malone's form can't be ignored, but the reason that I might agree with you on the idea of it being a good matchup for Waterford is that if you drag Kevin Moran into the other end of the field, and we know Malone will go deep looking for work and looking for ball, Kevin Moran is certainly somebody who can punish you. But just as you mentioned Shane Fives, and you're thinking, here's a guy who stays at it and he turns the corner over the course of a game. So what would you expect from a pig farmer, only a grunt?
What would you expect from a pig farmer? Only a good bit of ignorance. And fairness, Peter Casey definitely got it as well. Darragh Fives was obviously out with his brother as well. He's had a quad injury recently too. He could potentially come back into the mix. Maybe Irla Daly comes in, maybe Conor Gleeson comes in. They have a couple of options. If Conor Gleeson had game time under his belt, I'd have absolutely no problem bringing him in. But that'll be an interesting one, and I'm sure they're obviously not going to want that cornerback on Kelly if Kelly veers into the full forward line. So I wouldn't be surprised if someone like Callum Lyons picks him up, maybe 2, 4, 5, 6 or 7.
Yeah, the only thing, if Callum Lyons is taken out of wing back to man mark Tony Kelly, and at times that will be at wing back, who marks Shane O'Donnell? We've already picked out Kevin Moran for Cathal Malone, and assuming Liam Cahill is thinking the way we do, who then goes on Shane O'Donnell? Because he's been playing in the half forward line. Is it going to be a case of him starting in Tadhg de Búrca's neck of the woods and maybe being left somewhat free with a midfielder told you have to go and screen in front of him? Will that be Jake Dillon, who was sort of buzzing around everywhere but at times was spilling the ball? He's a good player, but at times needs to be more, as they say in American sports, take care of the ball a bit better. I don't think Jamie Barron will necessarily be looking behind him to mark Shane O'Donnell. And by the way, Jamie Barron has an awful lot more in him too. It just didn't quite happen for him the last day. He got on a nice bit, but it just didn't quite happen. He's normally so brilliant and elusive on the ball, but for whatever reason, I'm not quite sure. But do you think Shane O'Donnell will be looking to go centre forward and try and get a bit of joy there? The flip side is you could put someone like David Fitzgerald there and hopefully his size is used as a battering ram.
Well, they know if they put O'Donnell out centre forward, it puts a big conundrum in place for Callanan and for Waterford, because De Búrca is going to want to sit back. O'Donnell's not the sort of fella that you can let get on ball. He'll punish you from play. It could be a totally different game. Well, he won't
punish you from deep though. He won't punish you with 5 points from 60 yards out though.
From 100, no, he probably won't. But as we said, like Tony Kelly has been lauding him, and I think anybody who understands hurling will see the work that O'Donnell is doing, the selfless work that he's doing. Actually, we had a comment in the other day about in our top 3 selfless hurlers. Someone said Conor Fogarty from Kilkenny was a number 3, which is a fair point too. Another lad who does a lot of selfless work, along with Will O'Donoghue and Shane O'Donnell. But that'll be interesting because it will force the Borca to step up a small bit. And again, if O'Donnell does get a bit of the ball and he starts running, I've said it before, I think he's one of the most foulable players in the game. Like this, that's probably another kind of debate.
I'd love to.
Yeah, who draws more fouls in the game than O'Donnell? There's probably only a handful of guys that do, I'd say.
Yeah.
And he creates another problem for them. But there, just when we're talking about the range of scores, like the Ryan Taylors of this world are going to have to chip in a bit more. The David Fitzgerald are going to have to chip in a bit more. Having McInerney back as well, where does he come in? With Jason McCarthy coming in midfield, I think he was midfield. Positions are fluid enough, but I think he was around the middle of the field. I thought he was really, really effective.
Yeah.
So does McInerney come in at the back, or does he come in, midfield again, where they could potentially get maybe 2 or 3 points? That's another interesting question for Brian Loughnane as well.
And something that Liam Cahill and his team planned the last day against Limerick. And let's not understate how well they did to go from a team that hadn't won a championship game since 2017 to beating Cork quite comprehensively, and then really putting it up to Limerick the last day, losing by 4 points and being level with, what was it, at the start of the second water break, that area, they were level in the game. When you compared with the utter humiliation they suffered last year, scoring just 10 points at home and having basically Limerick kind of grind their boot on top of their heads. But what they did with the puck outs the last day, they kind of said to Limerick, you know what, you can go short all you want and we'll try and cordon you down the wings, or put Barry Nash, have him running down the byline and basically strike it straight up the line or cross field where it's quite dangerous, because if it gets intercepted it's always going to be a scoring chance.
And that's why there were so many sideline balls as well, Shane, and people are probably wondering why the ball was spilling out over the sideline. Both teams had to nearly avoid the middle channel because it was so congested, and they were allowing the puck outs go to the corners.
So the point being then, to jump ahead to the game at the weekend, are Waterford going to tell Clare you can do the same thing again here, and then do Clare have the hurlers in the back line where, it's fine, Barry Nash, and he did well. He could hit any sort of a ball to Keane Lynch, Will O'Donoghue and the other players that we've talked about. They are going to control the first time turn and invariably beat their man. Are Clare going to be able to do the same thing? Do they have the men to carry it out? Do they have the men to control it around the middle of the field, turn and beat their men? Very
interesting point, because it was almost like a game of chicken they played with Nicky Quaid. They were and Jackie Taylor said it well on commentary, said they were giving him that 5 yards and almost saying, go for it. If you're able to put it into that space and do that fine intricate passing, go for it. And I think they'd be happy enough to try and make Eibhear Quilligan do it, just because of his inexperience. And I think they'd be happy enough to give the cornerbacks the ball. Like Rory Hayes and Derek Honan, I think, said it to you earlier on this week. Brilliant man marker. Maybe a small bit suspect on the ball, and that's only an inexperienced kind of thing as well. So I wouldn't be surprised if Waterford kind of play that game where there's 2 inside in the full forward line, and they're almost daring Quilligan to go for that puck out and try to put the puck out through the eye of a needle, even to a wing back. And I think they'd be happy enough with the cornerbacks taking it up, and I think they'll give themselves a 50-50 chance of turning over the ball from there or forcing a mistake. So that's going to be really, really interesting.
Yeah, so that's where the importance of Jack Prendergast, who was really good last week, and Desi Hutchinson, their ability to cover ground will be really important. But some of those Clare backs, I do feel confident enough with them having the ball in the hand. Now maybe get your comments in and let us know if you think otherwise, but I think Pat O'Connor is always very good in the ball. I think Conor Cleary looks a bit ungainly at times because he's so tall, but generally I find that he does the right thing with the ball, or at least tries to do the right thing with the ball. It's the first season for Rory Hayes, so it's probably a lot to ask him to go and do that all the time, but if he's able to step up and do the man marking jobs, it shows that he's happy enough to be on this stage, so maybe why not? Then David McInerney, do you put him in the half back line? There is one lad who'll turn and run at you every single time. I mean, he's not the sort to back down. I don't know, do you want to see him centre back, or would you rather put him in midfield and it worked with Jason McCarthy. It hasn't necessarily worked with Davy McInerney at midfield. Certainly the game bypassed him against Limerick. He got 2 early points against Laois, but actually felt much of the first half had bypassed him before he got red carded.
Yeah, you're parachuting a guy into centre back who hasn't played at centre back at inter-county before. But the only thing I'd say about that is Shane O'Morey started centre back. Shane O'Morey started centre back in the first day against Limerick. Conor Cleary was probably there the last day. So it's not as if Pat O'Connor was there earlier on in the league. So it's not as if they've had a consistent centre back. And I was delighted to hear Honan say it. Like, I have been calling for McInerney to play 6 for a long time. I remember him literally controlling a Fitzgibbon semi-final at centre-back and a Fitzgibbon final at centre-back for UL when he was captain a couple of years ago. And I just think it would allow him to do so much hurling, potentially pick up a couple of scores as well. So I wouldn't be that surprised to see him come in there. And as you say, if he's the one that ends up on the ball, maybe like even if he drifted into cornerback and they were going to let the keeper hit sharp puckouts, there's a guy who'd be unbelievably comfortable on the ball. So that will be another interesting facet. I probably would prefer to see him come into defence, even though I have him at midfield on my fantasy hurling team. So I would like to see him be in the positions where he can get a couple of scores.
But the flip side is he might end up as a spare man anyway. If Waterford draw players back into their own half of the field, and they may not do it here, they may feel we can go mano a mano against Clare, we've just as good players. But he could actually be the spare man back there. And Paul Flanagan was kind of drafted in for, I think it was actually his senior debut against Laois. He was under 21 captain, I think it was 2013 at this stage, and he was sweeper against Laois. But maybe they might feel that now that we've rejigged and put Jason McCarthy in midfield and he's done pretty well, could David McInerney be our spare man at the back? So that'll be interesting to see. There'll obviously be a little bit of a rejig there, but I think you could end up with McInerney as that spare man if that's how it pans out.
Yeah, it would probably be. Listen, that would be Clare basically playing the cards in their favour, wouldn't it? Really, I think something that it definitely has to be talked about. Waterford were absolutely outstanding last Sunday, but they're coming out. They basically had 5 days of full rest before they play Clare on Saturday, and to me that has to be a big worry. I was talking to Tony Brown for a piece in the Independent tomorrow, and he just was saying, like, what would it actually mean if they can get over the line 6 days later? And he just said it would show real character in this team, because a lot of teams struggle to front up week after week, and their biggest issue is to recover after the effort that went into playing probably the best team in the country was absolutely massive. You could see the likes of Jake Dillon coming off, having emptied the tank for the cause. That's going to be Waterford's biggest thing this week. They have 5 days to get ready, and it's a big ask. And it is. Don't get me wrong, they're a very, very fit side, but lads were coming off fairly spent after the game, and you're turning it around very quickly. You lost a man, Shane Fives. You're basically not doing anything in training this week. You're just recovering and getting ready for the game. That's not to say Clare didn't have a game last week and the week before. They have, but they're coming in with momentum. They had an easier game last week. They had an easier game physically. There's no point in saying any different. They had Wexford at arm's length throughout. So while Clare are 7-4 underdogs, like, this is a 50-50 game for me. It genuinely is. I do think the 6 days, whatever, if there was any little edge that Waterford had, I do think the 6 day turnaround kind of puts it more 50-50 for me anyway.
I know we still fixating too much on Colin Galvin not being there, John Conlon not being there, Ian Galvin not being there, Peter Duggan being there, Podge Collins going to the footballers. Is it kind of at the stage now where we have to get past that and say, well, Clare have beaten, I know it wasn't an impressive win over Laois in the sense that they won by a point, and they'd probably expect to win by more, with all respect to Laois. I mean, they haven't been pulled up trees this year, being honest. But they won in a test of character with 14 men. They also beat Wexford heavily. Do you know what I mean? It was probably more comprehensive than the scoreline suggested. They lost to Limerick by 10 points, but there was definitely some positives in that performance. And it wasn't just all Tony Kelly. Like Derek Onan says in the piece, which you can see on the website there, it wasn't just all about that. Clare beat Waterford last year, 120 to 22 points. So is there enough evidence there that we're just assuming Waterford will somehow come through here? The more that I think about it, like, if you're to pick the best 2 or 3 players on both sides, like, you're going to go with probably Tony Kelly, Shane O'Donnell, and you can probably jump in and help me out there. But
like DeBork, I'd say as well. I would have him in there. Side, and Jamie Barr. And
Jamie Barr. Like, if you're to go to the best players on both couple of sides, it's really, really tight. It's really tight, and maybe there's slightly more depth on the Waterford team, but not even by that much. And who is the star player on the field between the two teams? Who is by a mile the form player? I mean, it's
Tony Kelly. You know, at the moment, you know exactly what you're going to get from him. He's potentially going to win the game single-handedly.
Yeah, and the thing is, maybe Wexford didn't necessarily man mark him in the way that we think was the best approach. They went for a bigger man in Matt O'Hanlon, whereas you would imagine now that Liam Cahill is going to look at that and decide, okay, I need to put pace on him and maybe I need to interchange lads. So he's really going to have to plan for him in a way that I don't feel that Wexford probably did to their best. And Limerick didn't man mark him. And Laois, I didn't feel like they man marked him. Now maybe Eddie Brennan might tell us differently, although maybe he's not saying a whole pile at the minute. But the point that I'm saying is, will Waterford be able to adequately lock him down? If they do, Waterford win the game. But he's on such fire, and it seems so delicately poised otherwise. And you're even saying about that extra day's rest. Jeez, I'm nearly starting to lean towards Clare, and Clare fans will be shocked to hear that.
Yeah, no, I was on Scariff Bay radio the other night, and I said I went for.
Oh, I was
listening. I said they'd be glad to know that I went for Waterford, because I've gone against Clare in nearly every game so far, and they've managed to prove me wrong. But this is really is a 50-50 game, and I think, to be honest with you, this is the type of game that probably has extra time and possibly penalties written all over, because I'm finding it very hard to separate the two of them. And are we being a bit foolish maybe with Waterford by overplaying their performance last Sunday, and overplaying their win against Cork, especially considering Clare have built up a load of momentum. Their best performance probably of the year so far was last weekend. So yeah, this is unbelievably tight for me.
Yeah, I was talking myself into Clare there, but now as I just look down over some of the stats that I did last week on the Limerick Waterford game, and I look at how close they got, and the fact that they scored 33 scoring chances against Limerick, and how did Clare do comparatively, it's probably the 6 day turnaround that is the thing, and the momentum that Clare have. That's
and you'll know about that after 10 minutes, won't you? You'll know whether they're leggy or not. This is a classic game for if you're betting and running. You'll probably know after 10 or 15 minutes. But it's that 6 day turnaround is really what gets me now. That's the real kind of nagging doubt in my mind.
Yeah, but it's just that Waterford were able to come out after half time, and they were really competitive in the first half. And I just they come out after the break and they score 3 points in a row, and they pull it back to level against Limerick. And Limerick jump ahead and they pull it back level again. And yes, down the stretch they lose the game, but they were still creating chances. Yes, they were sometimes snatching at them, and they had a couple of attempts blocked and short of the goalkeeper, which suggests poor decision making at times. But you're in the game against Limerick with 10 minutes to go, whereas Clare were not. And Clare have played an extra game as well, I think, in that period of time. I'm pretty sure they have played an extra game in that period of time. I think, my gut is after taking over here, and I think I am going to just about go at Waterford.
I'd probably be just going with Waterford too, but it's after extra time. This is one of these games. I think the best thing about the two quarter-final games this weekend is, would you be surprised if either underdog won? No, not in one bit. Just an interesting quote as well from Tony Brown, just talking about, he wasn't necessarily saying this about the new Waterford, but when he said this, I kind of thought this is probably what a lot of the Waterford boys are thinking maybe this year, maybe as opposed to other years. He was talking about his own career and his own kind of big game ritual and what he would do the morning of a championship game, and he just said, rarely a year went by where I wasn't able to get up on a Sunday morning, pack my bag for a championship game, wash my face, look in the mirror and say, "Jays, I think you left it a tad bit short today." There's a great solace in that, basically a great solace in knowing that you have every angle covered. But if you haven't every base covered, there's great anxiety in it too. And I think Cahill seems to have nearly every base covered with them this year. And I think there's a nice kind of a swagger to them in that they know they've a lot of physical preparation done. They know they're as well prepared as anybody else. Me and you both probably know we've been in that situation where maybe you were carrying a knock into a game, and it's, you're trying to survive rather than thrive, if you know what I mean. Whereas it looks like a lot of the Waterford boys are thriving now, and they feel they can go out and they feel they can really take on their man. They're not just hoping to, reach the 70 minutes now. They're hoping to really push on. I think they'll just edge it. If they were to get to an All-Ireland semi-final, it'd be a huge year for Waterford. They'd have won their championship game, they'd have won another championship game, they'd have a really respectable performance in a Munster final. I wouldn't be surprised if Clare won, but I think Waterford would just edge it.
What did you make of the sort of war of words this week between Ger Loughnane and Davy Fitz? In Ger obviously and I enjoy listening to Ger massively because the thing is he doesn't hide when he's making comments. He doesn't sugarcoat it. He just hates it without salt, and I do love that. But Davy Fitz, he hit back fairly hard, and I think he said what was it? Did you have the quote just there where he was talking about basically something along the lines of he just thinks it's sad really at this point, Davy. And
yeah, no, he said he doesn't hate Ger Loughnane. He just feels sorry for him, and he feels he thinks it's a bit sad the way he feels like he has to take a cut at somebody different every week. And it was just interesting. Obviously, Pat O'Connor, the Clare hurler, was kind of put up for interview this week, and he was just talking about, like, he says the shadow looms large, the shadow of the great '95 team, the shadow of Davy, Ger Loughnane. He said, but I would hope in the future that those men, along with some of the teams I was involved with in 2013, will become more involved in Clare and in leading the county forward, be it administration, coaching or whatever. There is such a force of personality there, such knowledge as well, that you'd like to think they could all come together and unite and just drive the county forward. 95 was such a landmark year that really brought the county front and centre, and there is a real residue of that they were the men that kind of broke the mold. I've said it to you before. I think it's sad that men who 25 years ago did the unthinkable together, Loughnane as manager, Fitzgerald in goals, and Loughnane as fullback, that these guys don't get on now, and that with all the reunions that they all won't be there, or if they are all there, there'll be a very, very strange kind of tension to it. I don't like that. Maybe it's only a natural thing that being competitive people, that they would that you're bound to maybe fall out over hurling or different bits and pieces. But I know personally I wouldn't like to be falling out with any teammates or any managers or anything like that down through the years, even though it probably is inevitable. And people that know me will probably say, what are you talking about? You've fallen out with several different managers over the years. But particularly with a successful team and guys that you made history with, I do think there's always a tinge of sadness when it all kind of falls apart.
The flip side is, if you're dealing with a load of big personalities, and it would have taken big personalities to win in All-Ireland, whether it's Clare coming out of more or less nowhere and the Doldrums and the Whipping Boys and all that to win 2 All-Irelands back in the 90s, or whether it's a big team that's kind of winning year after year after year, you're going to have a lot of those guys in the media for several years afterwards. We see at the moment there's you can't look left or right without seeing a former Kilkenny player in the media in the last couple of years. I think that's fair to say. That's not even having a pop. That's just kind of the way it is. And in the coming years, if some of their teammates take over, and I mean, you see a lot of the former players under Cody are now becoming inter-county managers at different levels. Like in the next 5 or 6 years, if these ex-players are in the media, you're going to have to be making big-ish statements or whatever to remain in demand for these media positions. They're going to inevitably end up having pops at each other. And in another couple of years' time, you might find with Tipperary, some of the guys who are playing now or just finished, that they're going to take over county teams and their former teammates are going to take it over. So isn't that just kind of the lay of the land in a way?
Yeah, no, you probably say that too. And to be fair, no one could accuse Loughnane of not being, how should we say, given his thoughts and being a pundit that people want to hear. What's the worst thing you can be as a pundit or an analyst is to sit on the fence. And in fairness to Loughnane, he won't sit on the fence. In fairness to Davy, even I'd be surprised even if the Sunday game don't have Davy later on in the year, because they know they're going to get honest and forthright kind of comments from him.
Well, he was a columnist while after being a player as well for a while. He was a columnist with the Star. So, an awful lot of these big personalities, they do end up doing that, and there's an onus on you to call it out. People want to know what your real opinion is. You can't just phone it in.
Do you know the person who's licking their lips most in all of this is Connor Sketches, because he has material for the next 15 years, I'd say how it is.
But like, you see Paul Kimmage slating was it Rob Kearney and Sean O'Brien for their absolutely dull autobiographies, and this is the home of slating rugby as well. But I think in general people would rather people call it out. But it's gonna lead to friction. But I mean, c'est la vie.
The thing about it is as well. I think the normal punter will respect the person a lot more if they call it out. For example, Jackie Tyrrell's autobiography is one of the best GA autobiographies I've read, purely because it's brutally raw and honest. And he has no problem, saying that Brian Cody did X, Y, and Z wrong, even though, Brian had him in St. Pat's in school and he's the same club man. And I don't know if Brian Cody would be too impressed with some of the contents of that autobiography, but there's an honesty to it, and I think that's his job now. That's part of his job now, is to be a pundit and call it as he sees it. And I think definitely the punter definitely has more respect for somebody who doesn't sit in the fence, without a doubt.
So the other semi-final, or quarter-final I should say, this weekend is Tipperary against Galway at the Gaelic grounds. Now
let's call a spade a spade. You were absolutely bulling last Monday when the draw came out, because every time Galway play Tipperary, there's a little bit of pee runs down the side of your pants.
It is an uncomfortable experience, whatever it is. They're such a physical, athletic side. The one has hurt. The one has hurled the way we like to, albeit at the same time it's been a brilliant rivalry, and has it been the rivalry of the decade? The last 4 meetings between them, it's 2 wins apiece in the championship. Like 2014, Tipperary were in bother, and Paddy Maher was struggling to deal with Jonathan Glynn, and James Barry actually went back and did a really good job on him and ended up full back for a couple, 3 or 4 years because of that. But Tipperary won that game. Callanan, I think, scored 3-8 that day, and Lara Corbett scored a couple of points around the hour mark, and it just turned Tip's season around. 2015, Galway beat Tipperary 26 points to 316. Shane Maloney with that winner after a lovely crossfield ball upfield by Joe Canning. Maloney turned Cathal Barrett and knocked her over the bar.
Cathal Barrett slip. People still remember that slip. Like, it's one of the only mistakes he's ever made at county level, I'd say.
Yeah, and then the following year, Tipperary beat Galway 219 to 218. I think a big factor that day was John McGrath going in full forward. Bubbles scored that brilliant goal where he smacked it into the ground from a narrow angle. Joe Canning went off injured just before half time. And then 2017, there's a huge mention of Joe Canning here. He scored, I think, the last 5 points as Galway beat Tipperary 22 points to 21. Very uncomfortable viewing for yours truly that there. But all of these games are. Now, coming back to that point at the start, is this the rivalry of the decade?
I'd argue that it probably is, Shane, to be honest with you. If you look at the Kilkenny and Tip rivalry of the last decade, you're obviously looking at that 2010 final when, you know, Tipperary won quite well in the end. The 2009 final is taken out of this. You have the Nolan Park game, which was brilliant in fairness, but was probably two sides that were, you know, it was their last dying punch probably of that season. You have the 2014, the drawn game, which was an absolute epic. The replay was a good game, probably, as Dunfield say, a good game, not a great game. And then 2016 final was a hammering. 2019 final was a hammering.
So was the 2012 semi-final, actually, to be fair. I mean, you're talking about Tip hammering Kilkenny. Kilkenny did hammer Tip 8 years ago as well.
Fair point. Now that threw up one of the great memories, obviously, with Lar following Tommy around, like, which is just one of the most bizarre and probably one of the most talked about tactics in the history of hurling, I'd say, when you go back through it. But then when you look back through the Tip and Galway rivalry, like, what springs to mind for me? Obviously, Canning's point, that iconic picture. Like, you'd probably say, like, that was the score that won Galway the All-Ireland. Then there was, like, Noel McGrath's comeback in 2015 and Anthony Cunningham shaking hands with him after, even though Galway had beaten Tipperary. Shane Maloney's point, Lara's point in 2010, to me that was the point that won Tipperary the All-Ireland, realistically, because they needed to get over that line. And I actually remember Ian Ryan skinning Paddy Maher for a goal that day. He got a belter of a goal on him that day. So 15, 16 and 17, they're three of the best games, I would say, of the last decade. And I'd nearly say, because they're not meeting each other every year and they're not from the same province, I'd nearly go and say that's probably been the rivalry of the last decade. And that's why people were so excited when the draw came out on Monday morning. Yeah,
14 goals in those 3 games of 2014, 15, 16. None in 2017. So obviously the teams changed tack a small bit there. I wonder will we get many in this game. Now, if you look at the form guide, Tipperary lost heavily to Limerick the first day, 323 to 217. Then beat Cork last weekend, 218 to 117. Galway's point of view, they beat Wexford very, very handily the first day, 127 to 17, and then lost the last day, 220 to 24 points. So they scored 1 goal in 2 games, whereas Tipperary have 4 goals in 2 games. Do we read anything into that? I mean, obviously Tipperary have conceded more goals as well.
Tip are going to need goals to win. That's what I'd read into it. I don't know if they would. I don't think they would have beaten Cork without a goal or two. And in fairness, it was probably Jake Morris's goal that kind of finished it off. I would personally think that Tip will need a goal or two to win it. And history and recent statistics would probably suggest that Galway haven't been, you know, hitting the net in recent years, even winning the All-Ireland in 17 without hitting a goal in their last 3 or 4 games. Like, if Tipper to win, I would say they'd want to be putting up 218, 219, that type of a score. And would it be, you know, it wouldn't be inconceivable to think that Galway would go scoreless again. The one criticism of Galway is probably, for all their dominance, maybe that they don't go for the throat a bit more.
Is that because they went with a sweeper the last day? And the more, and I watched back the game, I think I've watched it 2.5 times at this stage. I still can't get over the fact that they played it a sweeper. I understand why. You want to make sure that Colin Fennelly doesn't get a run at goal, and maybe because you're worried because Dahi Burke's only back from injury. But you also don't want TJ Reid to get in there either. So you can understand why.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. They bowed to Kilkenny a small bit. Kilkenny were still able to get 2 goals in spite of the sweeper. And I just think Pádraig Mannion's too good to be not wasting. Wasting's not the right word, but I think he's too good to be sparing in that role. They easily could have played Aidan Hart in that role. Be interesting to see if they play a sweeper at the weekend. I think Tipp kind of negotiated Mark Coleman very well when he was playing a sweeper at times. It meant, and we've talked about this before, it meant that the ball coming into Callanan was more out to the side rather than in here, and it meant he was probably less of a goal threat, but it probably opened up a few avenues for maybe Jason Ford when that ball came in, and even Jake Morris when that ball came down through the middle as well. But it's interesting because like who's gonna pick up Conor Whelan? Like, will Ronan Matter pick up Conor Whelan again? The question mark would probably be pace wise. Has he the pace to stick with Conor Whelan physically? I'd say he'd be able to match him to some extent. I think Cottle Barrett kind of probably matches up fairly well against Brian Concannon.
I think Alan Flynn will go on Concannon.
Do you think so?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they've got more choice now. Like, what would be the worry? The worry about Tipp maybe has been a perceived lack of pace in defence. I think with Barrett and Flynn in the full back line, they have a lot more pace there than they had. And that's not to say that any of the other guys are slow, but I just think they have guys that are able to maybe cover for other lads now. So I definitely think that helps. But there's a couple of really, really intriguing matchups as well. Like, who picks up Canning? Do they put not a specialised man marker on him, but if he's on the wing, does Paddy pick him up? If he's in the centre, does Brendan Matter pick him up? There's all kind of intriguing little conundrums there.
Yeah, and I wonder for Tipperary, do Heffernan and maybe Seamus Kennedy, do they come back into the team? I mean, because Heffernan was available on the bench the last day, whereas Kennedy we haven't seen at all since he got injured. And they would be 2 huge boosts, and I've talked about the size profile and athleticism of Galway. If you have Heffernan and Kennedy back into the team, that's 2 big men. But Niall O'Meara moved into the back line, and as I said the other day, I think he was possibly Tipp's most outstanding player in that win over Cork. So I would be a little disinclined to move him out, especially if you've got Dan McCormick doing really well on the wing, if you've got Willie Connors coming in and having a really good second half the last day, and probably he was arguably the key to it along with Michael Breen. So all of a sudden, from a Tipp team that looked like, where are they going from here after that game against Limerick, all of a sudden it feels like, right, what that game against Limerick did was force them to look at the team and honestly say, right, can we put that guy here, can we put that guy here, okay, we need to change things. As I keep saying, it's learning the hard way.
Yeah, no, 100%. I'd definitely be sticking with Niall O'Meara wing back. I thought he was Herity caught him for a couple of points, but I thought he was really.
He caught him for one.
Only one.
Only one. I watched it 3 times.
I debate that. I look back on it again later on.
How many times did you watch the game? How many times did you watch the game?
I was there and I watched it once.
So you watched it once in total?
Twice. I was there and I watched it on TV.
You watched it again. Okay, I watched it 3 times and I was watching this carefully, and for my money, he only scored 1 off him, and I think he was very, very good. Yeah, I've been watching Hurling on repeat. I'm a sad man. There's not a whole pile going on. We can't even go to the hairdressers, which you badly need.
Well, that's true, yeah. I think Heffernan been having another week. He got a full week's training under his belt last week, and Seamus Kennedy having an extra week as well. Like, neither of them might start, but the idea that you could bring one in after 20 minutes if something was going wrong, or the idea that they'll be able to finish the game strongly, like, chances are, like, I would have been worried about Tipp's defensive options last weekend if something happened, someone in the back 6. Now, nothing did, but they could easily pick up an injury, or someone could be tired on the hour mark, whereas now I think they've got bodies to come in. I think the big thing is, we talked about before, is probably lack of form being shown by John and Noel McGrath after that, like, really, really taxing club campaign. I wonder what did Sheedy do with them during the week, if anything. Did he give them 3 or 4 days to themselves? It's just a matter of getting refreshed. John McGrath had 2 shots on goal in the first half. They didn't go over. He looked a bit sluggish then. He was taken off, I think, just before half time. but like he has to play for me. He has to start, just because I think like they could plank him in the edge of the square, they could plank him corner forward, they could put him centre forward. I think he just offers so many options, and he's been traditionally in the last couple of years, he's a player that's caused Galway a lot of trouble. Now, Noel McGrath barely got the ball in his hand the other day and was caught kind of in possession a couple of times, and there was a couple of like nice little flicks he was trying to do, maybe that's more associated with summer hurling than winter hurling. But again, to me, he has to start as well. Would you be a bit surprised like if one of them ended up with man of the match on Saturday? I wouldn't be that surprised. And if they do, to me, Tipp will win the game. If one or both of them have big games, I think Tipp win the game. But it is worrying, the lack of form after the 11 weekends in a row with Loughmore, and even the heartache of losing 2 county finals by a point as well. It doesn't look like physically and emotionally that they've recovered from that. But both those guys have bounced back from many setbacks in their both like personal lives and their hurling careers as well. So wouldn't be a bit surprised if both of them are really influential at the weekend.
Yeah, and if you look at John McGrath last year, his form coming into the All-Ireland final, he did not have a good semi-final against Wexford and was obviously sent off that day, and probably didn't carry great form even before that. And I know what you're saying, maybe they're not suited to that weather, but like, and I've heard people saying that because they are such nice wristy hurlers and all that. I don't necessarily go along with that. I do agree with the point of having played so many games with Loughmore and investing so much into that. You know, are they as fresh as they might be? That's a very fair point, but I think there's something about putting John McGrath full forward. Now, you like having him out centre forward because he can win the ball, he can throw it around, like he's very good in an awful lot of ways. He generally does the right thing with it. But putting him full forward was a big thing in the 2016 All-Ireland semi-final, because he caught 2 balls over Daithí Burke, and not many people catch ball over Daithí Burke. You saw him doing it to TJ Reid the other day. I think that there's an option to throw him in there and maybe move Callanan somewhere else if you want, or play the 2 of them in there and see how that goes along. And you should be looking to target a player who's been out for a number of weeks and only just come back in Daithí Burke. Ordinarily, he does really, really well on Seamus Callanan and has done in the last number of years. But I think if you're not at 100%, and you talked about those Tony Brown quotes about feeling like you've everything done and feeling like you're 100% going out into a game, if you're carrying a niggle or whatever it might be, you do have those nagging doubts. And something like a calf injury, which is what Daithí Burke had, if you send a few balls into Callanan and tell him, look, twist, turn, go at him, then, you know, we'll find out fairly soon. I like what you're saying about Paddy Maher going on Joe Canning, because one of the big things that Cork did was playing a sweeper for so long in the game. It meant that the likes of Paddy Burke or Paddy Maher could play as a sweeper or have a sweeper around him. And the one thing that Cork have is pace, and if you allow a sweeper, it somewhat negates, you know, the impact that pace can have. So I don't know, would it be somewhat like, how bad of an idea was it for Galway to play a sweeper? We understand you're trying to protect the back door, but just looking at how often that someone in the defence for Galway would have the ball, look up the field, and they wouldn't really have anywhere to hit it. Because the thing that I noticed about Kilkenny, and I saw them last year, is they won't follow you all the way out the field. They won't fully expose their full back line the way they did in the All-Ireland in 2016, and poor Joey Holan left thrown to the wolves that day. They seem to come out so far and then almost zonally kind of set up a little bit. And I'm not saying that's fully pre-planned, but they only go so far. So if you're Galway and you've drawn players back down the field, and maybe Concannon is inside and Niall Burke like it was the other day, like coming out of the backline, it looked to me like there was nowhere to hit the ball at times. And having that sweeper back there playing behind everybody, and it's not like Pádraig Mannion was coming off the shoulder around midfield like Kevin Foley looking for the ball carried on. I think it would be a mistake for Galway to play a sweeper here. And a sign, we talked, did Kilkenny fear Galway going into that match last week? You actually come away from it thinking, was it the opposite?
Yeah, no, it's a fair point. And like, you're thinking, how influential was Pádraig Mannion on the game? And then
not
thinking,
at all.
Not even.
Neither was Mark Coleman for Cork against Tipperary. People say he got on a few balls. He was not influential. And Tip are very experienced playing against the sweeper. So Tip don't mind playing against the sweeper.
Like, Pádraig Manning is that good. Like, we talk about him, like he's in the best half back category. He's in the top 2 or 3. I don't think you can afford to waste a guy like that. I think if they were going to play a sweeper, like Aidan Hart being dropped was an unusual one for me. I think he fits into that sweeper role very well and is flexible across there, and you'll get a lot out of him. I presume he's going to come back in. I like what you're saying about John McGrath going full forward. I'm not saying it would be a mismatch, but if Callanan goes corner forward maybe on Aidan Hart, would have probably a height advantage over him. Callan's probably not in the same form as last year, and it's going to be very, very difficult to be in the same form as last year. But like, what you have to love is how he empties himself, how he's totally embraced that role as captain. And I'm not saying that he didn't work hard before or anything like that, but he made some absolutely gut-busting runs. There's a run there. Now, in fairness, Colin Spillane was trying to strike it back into Limerick City because he stood that long trying to hit it. But Callanan literally made a choice that he was going to make a 60-yard run on the 0.01% chance that he would make a hook, and he did. And I think that's huge, and it's going to require things like that for Tipperary to win the game at the weekend. Like, if Callanan, if Callanan is in the sort of form where he's able to get, a 1-3, I genuinely do not see Tipperary losing this game. I really, really don't, particularly if Noel and John McGrath step up. And then you're wondering, from a Galway point of view, like, they only have 7 days to turn around what they would surely look at as throwing away a Leinster final in many ways. They conceded 2 goals, bounced back, and then totally faded out. I think they got a point in the last maybe 12 to 13 minutes of that game. So how do they bounce back from that? Do they come away with a load of regrets? They should have had 2 weeks. Now they only have a week. They're facing Tipperary, and all of a sudden the pressure and anxiety of it all is piled up. And I think that's what makes the weekend, that's what makes this game so intriguing. I think it was a huge test of character for Tipperary last weekend. There was a lot of things went wrong, including the 18 wides. A lot of the big names didn't stand up, and they still found a way. And I think they'll find a way at the weekend as well. But just even on it, like, as well, and I know you've gone into it in full detail, you always love to see the Callanan versus Canning battle, the battle of the seas, the battle of the marquee forward men, and that's going to be an intriguing part of it too. Which one of them can deliver most on Saturday? Well,
here's the question. Let's get to it. Who's had the better career? I mean, they both made their debut back in 2008, and like, they're from that era, which also includes Patrick Horgan, TJ Reid, even Shane Dooley, because I did a piece last year for the Sindo talking about all of this, and I'm going to bring some stats up on screen, and I'm going to ask you for your opinion as well. This is all the scoring career stats for the 2 players. So Seamus Callanan, over the course of his career, he scored 35 goals and 217 points, which totals out at 280. Joe Canning has scored 27 goals and 447 points, which is 528. Now, there's a huge discrepancy there. That's far more scores for Canning. But if you look at from play only, Callanan has 35 goals and 110 points versus Canning's 17 goals and 131 points. So slightly ahead there, Canning. He's got 8 more points from play in total when goals are converted to points. But it's the percentage from play is something that obviously would stand out as well here. 58% from play for Callanan over the course of his career, with Canning having 31%. So just on the face of it, just looking at those stats there, and you have them beside you as well, what do you reckon from that?
Yeah, Jesus. Wouldn't you give your right arm to have scored 1/10 of what either of them have scored in club championship, let alone county championship? They're outstanding figures when you put them down like that. I suppose the thing with Canning, the whole way throughout his Galway career, I would say he's been the main man. Since he announced himself that day against Cork down in Thurles with that 2-12, he's been the main man. He's been the focal point, particularly of a Galway team that were probably going not great for a long time. We asked the question, who led their county better through barren times, Canning or Owen Kelly? And like, that's a fair question when you're comparing Canning to Owen Kelly and you're not really sure who led their county better during barren times. That says a lot about him. So he's been the main man throughout. Callanan was probably a bit part player. That's not being disingenuous.
Well, he was in and out of the team. He was in and out of it. He started off like a house on fire, and then he was in and out for a couple of years.
Yeah, and then like there was Owen Kelly and Lar Corbett there beside him, one of the best forwards of all time, and like Lar, another one of the best forwards and a former hurler of the year. Canning didn't have that, we'll say, assistance throughout his Galway career. Realistically, name another marquee forward that he has played alongside, like really like top end, that will go down as one of the greatest of all time. Possibly Conor Whelan in 6 or 7 years, you might say that, but at the moment, no. So there was more pressure on Canning, and in fairness to him, he's probably delivered throughout his Galway career since Callanan really like upped his game, probably without being smart, after Declan Ryan left, and when he came back into the team and was given, we'll say, more responsibility by Eamon O'Shea.
After the first year, he wasn't actually started by Eamon O'Shea, especially in that knockout game in Nolan Park against Kilkenny. He was on the bench, strangely.
Thereafter, so 14 onwards, like, he's been nominated for Hurler of the Year 4 times, I'll be right in saying, 14, 15, 16, and eventually got it last year. Should at least be a 2-time Hurler of the Year. Canning is obviously Hurler of the Year in 2017. Interestingly, they both played together in LIT as well, in the one forward line for a couple of years, which is yeah, it'd be all right, wouldn't it? You imagine you'd gladly do the donkey work for those two boys in the forward line. To be honest, if I was looking at their careers as a whole, Canning has had a longer career, and I would say he's probably had a more consistent career throughout the duration. So I'd probably just be stumping for him. And his role has changed as well. That's not to say that Callanan was a half forward, maybe early stages of his career. Joe was known as a full forward and probably a goal getter. And then he's come out, he's probably reinvented his game. Him being reinvented as a centre forward probably was what tipped Galway over the line. And even in recent years, in 17, when those points needed to be got against Tip, Canning got them. And even in 18, he was probably better again, even in defeat. And he was probably single-handedly the reason why they nearly pulled something out of the 18 All-Ireland. So I'd probably just edge Canning, but I would give anything to have achieved a small percentage of what either of them have achieved throughout their careers.
There's time enough for you, yeah. With Joe Canning, if you look at his career, he's got one goal from play in the last 6 seasons. Whereas if you look at in the same time frame, Callanan has 5, 10, 18 goals, and overall from play, Callanan has 35, which is ridiculous. Every single goal he's got from championship is from play, so it's 35 compared with 17. So that's double the amount of goals. And if you look at the most goals Canning got in one season, that was in 2015. He got 4. The most that Callanan has got is 9, and that was also in 2014. Another couple of stats that I'm going to bring up on the screen here as well is so there it is, the goal scorer. And I was just talking about 35 from play, 27 for Canning, 17 from play. Now I did some stats. I didn't get a chance to update these to include 2020, but just including 2019, the percentage of scores from play: 53% for Callanan. Horgan was next on 33, Canning 32, TJ Reid 29, Dooley 28, and percentage of scores from play when free taker, because I thought this was important. Some years Callanan was free takers, others he wasn't. So 40% for Callanan, 31% for Canning, Horgan 30, Dooley 30, and TJ Reid 19% as well. You're probably going to accuse me of bias, are you, when I say I go with Callanan's, because he's had so many big days, and he's obviously won the 3 All-Irelands as well. Nominated for Hurler of the Year 4 times, should have won it probably twice. I think that one in 2016 very much should have gone to him or Pádraig Maher, and you could make a fair case for both. But I think just on the basis of how much he's scoring from play, given everything that all the ups and downs that Tip have had over the years, and you can say, oh yeah, there was a greater supporting cast for Tipperary with the players around him. But I don't know if that's necessarily true or not. Like, Galway are always towards the latter end of the championship. They've been in loads of semi-finals. They've been in or around finals as well, and they've won them. They've lost finals. 2 brilliant careers, but I'm just about going to go to Callanan. But on the club front, you'd obviously have to give Canning an extra nudge there as well because of all that he's done with Portumna.
The thing about Canning as well is you probably take in an outstanding underage career, an outstanding college career, an outstanding club career. Like, his body of work since he's 15 is absolutely outstanding. Like, he's basically been doing it for 16 years nearly. There's barely been, like, apart from last year when he was injured, there really hasn't been an off season. He's 4 Club All-Irelands. He's got a Fitzgibbon Cup. I think he was full forward on the Fitzgibbon team of the century as well. He'd be full forward on any club team of the last 50 years. But on Callanan as well, like, a couple of performances that maybe aren't talked about enough. That he got 9 points from playing an All-Ireland final. Like, Jesus Christ, 9 points from playing an All-Ireland final. The 3 goals, against Galway in defeat in 2015 as well. Like, there's between the two of them, some of the greatest individual performances we've ever seen, realistically.
Okay, and I'll just put this final little point then. In 2019, when Tipperary went the long route in 8 games to win the All-Ireland, Callanan scored a goal in every game, scored 8-17 from play-out over the course of the season. So he was crucial for Tip winning it. In Galway's All-Ireland winning season of 2017, Callanan was playing at centre-forward and scored a grand total from play of 10 points. So I think something like that, if you're to talk about the 2 most recent All-Irelands, both were crucial to their team, but you can't ignore 8-17.
No, I agree with you, but Callanan was the focal point in the full forward line. Canning was the focal point in a half. They played differently. They weren't trying to bang the onion bag, whereas Tipperary were. Listen, you can the stats can back up whatever the stats can. You can twist them to whatever way you want. Well, both 2 unbelievable careers, and you'd probably say with those 2 lads, and even with Galway and Tip this weekend, is this not on maybe on the 2 boys? They have a couple of years left yet, probably. But is this the final punch from a giant? Is this that if Tipperary are beaten this year, are you thinking with Limerick's dominance might struggle to win over the next couple of years? With Galway as well, it'll be 4 years next year without an All-Ireland if they're beaten at the weekend. Canning's probably going to retire in the next couple of years as well. Is Saturday's game the last punch of the last dance? Is it the last dance?
For some of these players it will be. I don't think either team will necessarily go away. They're still going to be thereabouts. But there is some sort of an element to that. Even the Galway team that played the All-Ireland final in 2017, there are fairly big changes. Even if you go from positions number 1 to 7, 4 of those players were different the last day. And just 9 from the 2017 final against Waterford started against Kilkenny the last day. So there probably is an element that they're moving away from those teams. But you don't realise how much teams change every year. There's always 2 or 3 changes on these teams, and you look at Premier League teams or whatever, and they buy in players, and you understand that they're upgrading. Okay, they've bought in another lad for 50 million. Obviously, he goes in and improves the team. And sometimes when young lads come through, you almost think, geez, this will weaken the team that they're taking out some lad who was experienced there for 10 years or whatever. But there is that constant refresh rate with county teams, and when that happens, changing 9 starters from 3 years ago, it's not that big of a deal. But the big question for Galway is, have they gone back to the team that used to back down up until about 5 or 6 years ago? They get to big finals and they leave it behind them. Because what they did against Kilkenny last week, that had that feeling of, we've backed down when the game was, when it was at the melting pot, in the heel of the hunt, we backed down. And look, Tipperary got battered a few weeks ago by Limerick. So both of these teams, there's probably a little bit of a chink in the armour there somewhere. But I don't know, do you get that sense from either team that there might be a little bit of a weakness there to be exposed?
Possibly, yeah. If you're looking at the form and you're looking at Wexford form, you place very little stock in Galway's performance against Wexford, given how bad they were the next day. Tipperary managed to hang in against the All-Ireland champions elect in most people's eyes, and a team that's caused them an awful lot of trouble. And they delivered a big performance against Cork and are coming in having shown character and a bit of momentum behind them. Galway kind of have to prove themselves again. That'll go 1 or 2 ways. And I think this is why it's such an interesting game. I would just expect some of the Tipperary the older faces, the likes of Pádraig Maher, Brendan Maher, the two McGraths, Callanan, just to have a bigger influence on things at the weekend. I expect it to be another real kind of, I suppose what we've enjoyed most about these games is they've been generally toe-to-toe kind of battles. Lads having to win one-on-one battles against their direct opponent, sometimes in 40 or 50 yards of space if you're in the full back line or the full forward line. And we're probably going to get that again on Saturday. I just would give the edge to Tipperary. I just give the edge because I think they have new faces that are coming in form, and I think they have experienced lads. It's funny, like you're saying, don't Noel McGrath have a point to prove now? He probably does. Does he have some people maybe doubting him? He probably does. Same with Pádraig Maher. It's mad to say it, and maybe with Brendan Maher as well, because they haven't performed yet this year, and I think they'll be mad keen to deliver another big performance. And even just some of the stats on All-Ireland defences, generally, reigning All-Ireland champions have gotten back to the All-Ireland semi-final at least. And, people have thrown a tip before that they haven't been able to do back-to-back or whatever. I don't really know if I buy that argument. In 11, they got back to a final. In 16, they got back to an All-Ireland semi-final. Or in 17, and were beaten by a Joe Canning point. This year they're back in the quarter-final. They could potentially be back in a semi-final. But I just be giving Tip the edge. I just think the momentum of last weekend and the character building win of last weekend, and just the nagging doubt in Galway, we faded away the last day. Can we turn it around, or is this the same old story again?
Yeah, and Damien Hayes said in the Mirror this week, I would definitely be using Davy Burke. He was obviously came on and scored a few points the last day. So will he start? Could he go in on Noel McGrath? Another couple of matchups. I can see Niall O'Mara going on Cathal Mannion, Brendan Maher going on Conor Cooney, and like we said already, Paddy Maher against Joe Canning. Maybe that would be the matchup there. There's some tantalising matchups. Just to finish off what Damien Hayes said, when Davy Burke came in the last day, he made an instant impact. The likes of Jason Flynn, I can't understand why he can't nail down a position in this Galway hurling team. I do think there'll be more changes in the Galway setup. I see Jason Flynn coming in for Niall Burke. I don't think Niall Burke made a huge impact from the start. Jason Flynn missed a gilt-edged goal opportunity around the 50th minute thereabouts. I'm sure I can find it here somewhere. I can't see it off the top of my head. Oh, actually, it was the 50th minute, yeah. He missed that goal chance. No excuses for missing that goal chance. You have to hang that in the top corner of the net or past the goalkeeper. It was a very, very poor shot. I think there's so much about this game that's intriguing. There'll probably only be a puck of a ball in it. I'd say there'll be war. There could be injuries. Whoever's waiting on the other side, whether it's Limerick or or Kilkenny in the All-Ireland semi-final, they're going to be against a battered and bruised team, albeit a team that'll be feeling pretty good about itself because they'll have won a war. The other thing is the referee. It's Johnny Murphy, and probably he hasn't seen championship action, has he, to date this year?
No, I don't. Not this season yet. No, I think it's his first championship match. Yeah.
Yeah, and he refereed that Dublin Wexford game that we were at in the league at the start of the year, and there was 50 frees in the game, 16 cards given out, and he's a referee from Limerick, and Limerick could be playing, depending on whether Clare beat Waterford or not, and then if there's a draw or whatever, Limerick could be playing the winners. Now, I'm not saying in any way, shape or form anything that Johnny Murphy is going to do in this game is going to have anything to do with what happens in the semi-final and facing his own county. But Shane Brophy of the Nina Guardian, he tweeted, while in no way having an issue with Johnny Murphy, is it fair on him that a Limerick man is refereeing Tip versus Galway when there's a strong chance the winners will play Limerick in a semi-final, and any potential straight card could give Limerick an extra advantage? Do you have any thoughts on that? I even see in the I think even in the Leinster football final, there's a Tipperary man refereeing Meath against Dublin, and best case scenario, Tip get to an All-Ireland final, and if a referee was nefarious enough to make sure Dublin got knocked out. I'm not saying he would, but I'm just saying you shouldn't be necessarily. Would you be putting referees in this position? Should you be?
Yeah, no, it was a bad one last year as well when Tip played Wexford. Sean Clare was refereeing it, and Kilkenny had booked their place in the All-Ireland final the night before. So I just think it's from a referee and administration point of view, it's a very, very awkward position to be putting them in. With regards to Johnny Murphy's performance earlier on in the league, that was one of the most frustrating games I've ever watched. I'd take a bad hurling game over any other sport most days of the week, but it was just so stop-start. It was more start than stop. The only thing I'd say about that is that was one of the first league games, and there was obviously a directive issued by the Referees Association that they were going to clamp down on this and this. The championship refereeing generally so far has been an awful lot better, a lot more common sense. So it's funny, isn't it, how there's games are refereed differently throughout the league compared to championship, because championship is so much more of a spectacle and everybody has their eyes on it and they tend to be blown a lot less. But I just hope it's allowed to develop into that sort of game, one of those classics that we've had over recent years, and hopefully the referee isn't at the centre of it at all and there's no controversy kind of going forward.
Yeah, I'm just going to go with Tipperary myself. Partly, there's always a small bit of leaning towards your own county. It's hard to avoid doing that, like you did before the Christy Ring semi-final against Down last weekend, albeit that didn't kind of work out for you.
Like when you tried to say to me that, you basically tried to get me to say that Offaly were going to win by 10 points doing handstands.
Yeah, well, some would say that should have been the case, but no, Down came through and won brilliantly. But I think Tipperary will just about nudge it, because I think I'd be wondering, is Dahi Burke 100%? I think there's probably less experience in the goalkeeper as well, and how will Ian Murphy react to that mistake last weekend, which was crucial in Kilkenny coming back? How much will that affect their confidence? Tipperary have had the benefit of playing a tough game in Limerick just last week. They've come through two absolute storms, two monsoon games, whereas it was difficult last weekend. Galway, Kilkenny in Croke Park, they had a fairly calm conditions for their previous ones. this will be war. And athletically, physically, Galway are well able for Tipperary and always put them to the pin of their collar. And you could make a huge case for Galway winning this game. And I think the bookies just have them favourites too. But I'm going to lean towards Tipperary because I saw enough in that Cork game that makes me think they're trying to do the right things on the ball. And if they get enough ball in Seamus Callanan's hand and a few other of those forwards, if John McGrath has a reasonable game, if Noel McGrath does, I can just see Tip coming out on top. But it's going to be a toss of a coin, isn't it?
There's nothing sure, Shane, than with the keeper. Like, Aidan Murphy's a good prospect, but when there was a cut, like Kilkenny put him in a couple of awkward spots the other day by making him decide whether he had to come out or not. And there's nothing sure than probably John McGrath being planked at the edge of the square and a couple of high balls coming in, and probably Callanan the same, or trying to isolate him and put him in awkward kind of situations. I'd say there's nothing sure than that. Big question from the Tip point of view as well is, like, Bubbles wasn't in the 26th the last day. Will he be in the 26th this week? There's talk that he mightn't be on the panel anymore. That's only hearsay at the moment, but interesting to see whether he's in the 26th. He was obviously the winning of the game in 2016 with that brilliant goal when he came off the bench. Has kind of struggled with injuries, but like if there was 5 or 10 minutes in him at the end, he can obviously has the ability to get a score that could win Tipperary the game. But so many questions and kind of ponderables coming into this game. But yeah, I'd just be going with Tipperary.
Yeah, okay. Well, we'll wait and see how that game goes, and I don't think any real hurling fan can wait for it at this point. The Christy Ring Cup final is on this weekend. As I said, you're going to Croke Park for both the Ring final and also for the Nicky Rackard final. Down against Kildare. Obviously, you've had a few days now to let it settle. Down's win over Offaly. Do you think that Down capitalised on Offaly's weaknesses, or Down are a good strong team and they've got a real chance coming in against Kildare because they're unbeaten so far?
Yeah, no, I think the latter. I think Down are a good side. They've got their house in order. They're obviously beaten in the ring final last year. They're promoted already, which it's a funny one going into a final. They both want to win it. It's kind of like, a Division 3 or 4 league final. You're up already. It's job achieved, and it's just a matter of getting silverware now. Huge for the two of them. Huge for Down and Kildare, both of them, to get up. Chatting David Herity for a piece in the paper on Saturday, and it's just interesting the way he was talking. They didn't train together from March 8th until October 8th, so even longer than any other county team, 7 months, because their club hurling campaign was still going on, and it was obviously it was called a halt before they didn't get a chance to come back with the county with a county championship played. And he just talked about there was some slices of luck they had throughout the year. Well, they had 4 cruciates, 3 of them during the club season. He just said things have fallen into place extremely well for us. The county final was supposed to be on the 10th. We would have had maybe 4 training sessions before we played Offaly after a 7-month layoff. When the finals were called off, we managed to get in 3 extra training sessions, and we managed to get a challenge game in against Carlow, while the walkover from Offaly kind of gave them another week of training. And it's funny, like, he would have said he had no luck last year. So of the 32 players that Joe Quaid handed over to him at the end of the 2018 season, he only had 16 of them available last year. But I think from the way he was talking, he seems to have a massive buy-in. Like, all told, if they had everyone fit, they'd have 43 players on their panel, which is huge. And a lot of guys have had exposure at a higher level. James Burke with DCU, Ryan Bourne with DCU would be on the DCU Fitzgibbon panel. Simon Lacey was on the UCC panel that won the Fitzgibbon, last 2 Fitzgibbons, I think, as well. And just on them going up to Christy Ring, he just said about the change of mentality. He said, after the club championship, I asked 8 lads in if they were interested in coming in and joining. If that was last year, I probably would have got 2 max, but this year I got 7 out of the 8. It's just been a fantastic turnaround in the space of 2 years, and now lads are mad keen to come into the setup. And I think he's a bit of ahead of himself. He didn't think they would maybe be in a position to get up to the McDonagh until next year because of all the players that they lost. But things have turned around. He's got David Slattery in from the footballers, massive addition, and he was kind of delighted to have him in the sense that he's also shown everybody else what inter-county physique is. He's had a good, successful football career, and he shows everyone kind of the template on the squad of what that kind of physique that they need to all get to. They have a load of young players, probably about an average age of about 22 or 23, but they also have like John Dorn and even Paul Dively, guys that have hung around. John Dorn has won 2 Christy Rings and never been promoted. So the 2 years they won the Christy Ring, they didn't earn promotion, which is mad, really. So regardless, he'll have earned promotion this year, regardless of what happens. And just one quick one from Herity. He said this a bit tongue-in-cheek. I asked him about a lot of Kilkenny guys been on the sideline now, and is it any surprise to him? And he just said back to me, tongue in cheek, he said, a great motivation to go out coaching teams is as soon as you start having babies at home. You want to get out of the house. It's that bit of freedom. I used to be at training an hour beforehand. Now it's an hour and a half. The brilliant thing is my wife doesn't know how far away Kildare is. Hopefully she's not listening in and doesn't fire it into Google Maps. But it's a big one. Kildare obviously only won the Christy ring 2 years ago, but with the turnover of players, it'd be obviously be a big for them to get their hands on silverware. From a down point of view, Ronan Sheehan has obviously done really, really good work there, because Offaly were a point or two, I would have said, better than in normal time. But in extra time, like, Down really, really kicked on. Two Sands, Owen and Dahi, very, very good hurlers. The keeper obviously was the hero of the day, saved 3 penalties and scored the winning penalty.
Stephen Keane. And here's a question for you. Do you think that Down will struggle to come down from that high of last week of going to extra time, of winning on penalties in such dramatic circumstances, whereas Kildare had a routine win, 324 to 1-9 over Roscommon. So they've probably had, midway through the game, they were already, maybe kind of evening themselves out and getting focused on next week.
Couple of ways to look at it. You could also say Kildare haven't had a competitive game since last March.
True, because the Offaly game was called off over COVID.
Yeah, walk over against Offaly. They were comfortable against a Wicklow side who were missing probably their best player in Andy O'Brien, and they were very, very comfortable against Roscommon. Flip side on the Down thing to Waterford, they've had 8 days. They obviously played extra time and penalties, but they've had 8 days. That was last Saturday. They definitely shouldn't be lacking any energy going into Crow Park. And I think it's great, in fairness to the GA, and we're probably quick to criticise, there's obviously going to be nobody in Crow Park, and they've still opened it for these 2 games that would traditionally be there. Would have been easier to play them at a provincial venue. They're probably losing a fair few quid by opening them up, but I think it's a good gesture, and it's a good reward for these lads, and in the Nicky Rackard Cup as well. The easy thing would have been to play the game somewhere else and have them forgotten about, but they're going to be centre stage on Sunday, which is good.
Yeah, and obviously I had David Herity coaching us with Coola for the latter half of this particular season. Very good. Beard was never not trimmed perfectly. Tanned legs were out on a regular basis. So fair play to you for that, David. I know, very good coaching though. Very good. And I can see how Kildare will be kicking on. Even coaching, like, whether it's the organisation, the setup of the team, the structure of it, how to use the ball, the forwards movement, both when you're on the ball and when you're off the ball to make yourself available. All that sort of stuff really stands to you. And when you have those sort of the T's crossed and the I's dotted, I think there's an awful lot of security in that. A bit like what Tony Brown was saying, do you feel you have everything done to prepare? Well, that individually kind of calms you. But as a team, if I know what the half back line are doing, I know what we're doing, we all know the plan for puckouts, how we're setting up both attacking and defence. All that stuff is worth scores and kind of has you collectively going out there as a very calm unit.
Big one as well, Herity said, I asked him, has Brian Cody influenced your coaching or management style much? And he said initially in the first couple of years, he said he used to drive into Dublin Camogie train and he wouldn't talk to anybody. He wouldn't even say hello to anyone. He thought he needed to be cold with people to get the best out of him. And he just said his approach, and you probably see this now, his approach has completely changed. He's far more talking to players. He said, and it was funny as well, he said, I asked him, like, why do you think, you got into coaching or whatever? He said, a lot of goalkeepers, like you look at James McGarry, would say, Donald Cusack, Brendan Cummins, they're watching. I thought it was interesting because they're actually standing watching the game more than anybody else. That's not saying they're not tuned in, they obviously are, but you're constantly thinking about things. Like when I'm playing cornerback or you're playing, fullback or full forward or whatever, you're not thinking about anything, you're just thinking about the ball and your man. But they get to watch the games more and become more kind of analytical, I thought that was interesting. He also said he would have been hard on himself maybe throughout his career, and he tries to tell people maybe and give them more advice on how to get the most out of themselves, which I just thought was interesting. His style has clearly changed as well. I'm not sure how to call that game. I'd probably just be favouring Down, being honest with you, even though there's probably a good bit of expectation from a Kildare point of view. Hard to know if the fact that they're both promoted already will affect either of their mentalities. But in Crow Park, I would say probably not. I'd just be favouring Down, I'd say.
Yeah, I think I'm just going to give Kildare the nudge here, but definitely a game to keep an eye out for. The Nicky Rackard final is also on this weekend. As you said, Donegal are going to face Mayo, so that's a nice little neighbours clashing over at the Wild Atlantic Way final, will we call it that?
Yeah, I think that's what we called it on Monday. I'd say that's probably about right. I'd say there's an interesting kind of subplot in this one as well. So Donegal's goalie is Luke White. He's from St. Martin's. He got a job in Carndonagh Community School last September. So I just think this is mad. This is the GA in a nutshell.
And that's Martin's in Wexford, by the way, for anyone who doesn't know where Martin's is.
St. Martin's, yeah. So he used to leave school straight away on Friday evening while they were still going in the club hurling and football championships. He'd drive down to St. Martin's. He'd get down for 8:30. He'd get half an hour of training, go home, and then he'd play the match on the Sunday, and then he'd do the 420 kilometres back up to Carndonagh or Inishowen, where he's living up in Donegal. So when John Myler came in as Martin's boss this year, they wanted to figure out, like, he's not going to be able to come down like during the week or anything like that. So I think John Myler had kind of befriended Declan Coulter. He plays with Donegal on an all-star trip in the last couple of years. So he got Luke White to ring him, and then the Donegal manager rang him, and all of a sudden he had an inter-county permit, and he was playing with Donegal. So he's still playing with St. Martin's, but he can play with Donegal. He actually scored a point in the semi-final against Tyrone as well. So he's clearly quite good. He was sub-keeper in 14 and 15 when Wexford won under-21 titles and were beaten in 2 All-Ireland finals as well. So that's a kind of an interesting one there. From a Donegal point of view, Declan Coulter and Davin Flynn both didn't play last week's semi-final, so they will need one or both of them to get over the line. And just an interesting one on Donegal's imports. Obviously, Luke White is one, but there's several other kind of guys there. There's Declan Coulter, who's originally from Armagh, Davin Flynn as well. And I just asked him, I asked Luke White, and he said, I don't know if it's applied by the Donegal County Board or what, basically about how all these guys have followed either girlfriends, partners or wives up to Donegal. And it's like a classic scenario. Like if you were the genius in the county board that sent these women down the country to bring these lads back up to Donegal and increase the standard in Donegal, you're an absolute genius. But they're coming up against Mayo. Mayo obviously would have played ring in recent years, and more than Donegal would have as well. Shane Boland and Cottle Freeman are probably their two kind of leading lights. They had a big win over Leitrim the last day, but it was tight until about 40 minutes when they got a soft goal, and they kicked on 2-15 to 3 points in the second half. They beat them, but going to be an interesting final as well. Very, 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 very tight. No more than the ring final. Very, very hard to call.
Yeah, both of them put up big scores in the semi-final. Donegal scored 325 and Mayo put up 323. So that's going to be a very tight one. Geez, when you think about it, that was a fairly bumper show. We've gone through any amount of stuff. And
we're not finished yet, Shane. We're actually not finished yet, because the two McDonagh Cup games probably have flown under the radar.
Yeah, I actually did a piece. Did a piece.
Yeah,
they've
flown under the radar. So neither Meath or Westmeath, they're playing on Saturday. Neither of them have won a game yet. Neither of them can qualify for the final, but I think both of them badly need a win, particularly Westmeath. You remember, Westmeath came in with a load of expectation this year, and they've just totally flopped. For a team that played Division 1 hurling earlier on this year, been a bit of a disaster for Shane O'Brien there. They're coming up against Meath, and then Kerry and Carlow is a huge game. It's basically a McDonagh Cup semi-final. Kerry were kept at arm's length against Antrim last weekend. Carlow and Antrim drew, but the fact that it's in Kerry definitely helps Kerry out, but I probably would be leaning towards Carlow just narrowly, I'd say, in this game. Obviously came down from the Leinster Championship last year. We've kind of said it before, nothing other than a place in the Joe McDonagh final will do for Carlow and Bonner after coming back this year. I'd probably just be edging them. If they win that, they're basically setting up a final place essentially with Antrim.
Yeah, actually I did a piece with Mickey Burke, the former Meath footballer who plays hurling for Meath this year. Jeez, I almost slipped my mind to Joe McDonagh there, but he was talking about playing against, he man-marked both Shane Conway of Kerry and Mouse Kavanagh of Carlow, so he was talking about comparing and contrasting the two, and he said they're both like predators, and he kind of said over the freeze they're both similar enough to TJ Reid in terms of the amount that they knock over. Yeah, like you said, Westmeath having a disappointing season, Meath very competitive in their games, and yeah, that does look like a pretty tasty game. Because there's so many games on at the weekends, it's hard to fit them all in. You'd love to see that game. It's on at the same time as Galway Tipperary, But alas, you can only watch so many games at the one time. But some very,
and there's
very
as much
tasty.
on the line, Shane. Like, no, there's as much on the line for them. Like if Kerry, we've said it before, Kerry get to the McDonagh final, they have a chance of getting into Leinster next year, which would be, that's huge news if they were playing in Leinster next year. I've said it before. Imagine Kerry, the football aristocrats, playing Kilkenny, the hurling aristocrats, in a Leinster championship. It would be bizarre. And from Carlow point of view, all the kind of good that has happened the last couple of years, winning the ring, winning 2A, winning the Joe McDonagh, like they don't want to slip back a level. They want to get straight back up. So very interesting this weekend, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, we've it all said at this stage. Brought to you by eFrontiers, the recruitment specialists. Go to e-frontiers.com, or if you want to get your CV in, if you're looking for work, go to ourgame, or send your CV, I should say, to ourgame at e-frontiers.com. Thanks very much, Michael.
Cheers, Shet.